chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you, as with joy as the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. The yoke of their burden, and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of the oppressor, you have broken as on the day of mighty.
The gospel reading today comes from Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 through 23. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the lake, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. For those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And as he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Out with the old and in with the new. That's our mantra, especially this time of year when we're so busy making and mostly breaking about now, our New Year's resolutions. We have technology, the iPhone 4. Oh, that's so last year. We need the iPhone 5. We need that functionality, iPhone 4 functionality. I can't be productive with work with that, so I'm going to need the 5, sorry. Music, Miley Cyrus, really? Yeah, that's last year. All of these things that keep us moving forward with this mindset that everything that is good lies ahead of us, but everything that's behind us should stay behind us, because traditions are just that. Something that's old, something that we dust off on occasion, like today on Communion Sunday, when we say these words of incantation, when we say this blessing over the bread and the wine, and we try to make it the body and blood of Christ. It's tradition, bring it out once a month, that's fine. But most tradition kind of just stays in the background and we don't really have much use for it. Well, the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his essay, To Grow in Wisdom, had this to say, especially when he talked about people. Because sometimes, as people get older, we seem to think of them also as irrelevant, and we kind of push them aside and want to keep them out of the way. We have to take care of them, we have to caregive for them, but mostly we want to keep them aside so that the younger folks, the new generation, those who really know what's going on, can step in and make things happen. And so he says, "I see the sick and the despised, the defeated and the bitter, the rejected and the lonely. I see them clustered together and alone, clinging to a hope for somebody's affection that does not come to pass. I hear them pray for the release that comes with death. I see them deprived and forgotten, masters yesterday, outcasts today. What we owe the old is reverence, but all they ask for is consideration, attention, not to be discarded and forgotten. What they deserve is preference, that we do not even grant them equality. One father finds it possible to sustain a dozen children, yet a dozen children find it impossible to sustain one father. Perhaps this is the most distressing aspect of the situation. The care for the old is regarded as an act of charity rather than as a supreme privilege. In the never-dying utterance of the Ten Commandments, the God of Israel did not proclaim, "Honor me, revere me." Instead, he said, "Revere your father and your mother." There is no reverence for God without reverence for father and mother. In Jewish tradition, the honor for father and mother is a commandment, the perfect fulfillment of which surpasses the power of man. There is no limit to what one ought to do in carrying out this privilege of devotion. God is invisible, but my mother is his presence. For some reason, we're always in such a big hurry to move on, to move forward, and to discard the wisdom of those who have preceded us, almost as if their wisdom was only good in the time that they gleaned it. My mom grew up in the 40s. What can she know? This is a whole different century. She doesn't know anything. But he says, there, in the presence of my mother, is the presence of God, showing that tradition is important. That we have to be careful not to throw away the traditions and the wisdom of those who have come before us, because in that wisdom, there are sometimes gems. Gems that just can't be thrown away. Gems that we have to hold on to. In fact, I believe right here, it says Henry Fugui. He's a part of tradition here of this church. Beloved member, couldn't get to church in the past 2 years because he was ill, but he was still had his heart with all of us. And he helped to set a tradition for all of us, and unfortunately he passed away last night. But he's still with us in spirit. The tradition that he and those who formed this church brought about still exists among us, and it's something that we cannot throw away. Because if we do, it's at our own peril. I met with him last week, and he spoke so highly of everybody, and so how happy he was to still be connected, and for the people who would visit him. And he had a rough go of it. He kind of like in this passage where he says that those who basically want to die because things get too difficult. He was unfortunately at that point. He had a lot of trouble breathing, and the quality of life was way down, and so he was just really resigned to his destiny. He wasn't afraid of it. Don't get me wrong. We sat and we talked and we prayed together, and he went with courage and we went with dignity. We can take heart in that. Then we looked to Matthew. Matthew had a great mind for tradition. Matthew, always, you can find him saying things like, ... so that the prophecy of such and such would be fulfilled. And we keep seeing this repeating over and over again in the book of Matthew. Even in this passage, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. So that what had been spoken might be fulfilled. He keeps saying this over and over again. And he speaks of this land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. What's so important about that? Well, let's back up about 3,000 years ago to the point when there were these tribes of Israel that were kind of existing in these little fiefdoms, or these little tribes, really. And eventually they came to a point where they wanted a king to unite them all together. And this is about the year 1050 BC. And so they found Saul. And they asked the prophet to anoint him as their king. And so, with a little bit of reluctance, he did so. And these tribes got together. But the tribes in the far north, Zebulun and Naphtali, in their lands, they realized that they were pretty much in this area by the Sea of Galilee, between there and the River Jordan, almost as far north as you could go in Israel before you were up into other countries such as Assyria and whatnot. And they knew that by agreeing to this unification of the kingdom, that they were really serving as a buffer zone from the enemies who wanted them out. Because after all, the Israelites came in shouting and shooting, and a lot of people felt that they didn't belong there. kind of like when they were reestablished in the 40s. It wasn't really much different. The weapons were different, but the process was very different. And so here they are, this newly formed kingdom, and now we're up in about the year 722 BC. And as Isaiah spoke of in this time that he lived in, you have the Assyrians up north. The kingdom by now is split. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And up north, they know that they're in trouble. Because they know that there's a very huge power just north of them, waiting, just itching to come down and do something. Well, the north and the south didn't like each other very much. And so the king in the south, the king in Judah, made a treaty with the king of Assyria. Said, I'll work things out with you if you get rid of these guys. And so they came down and they wiped them out. And they took everybody up into Assyria, but they didn't leave them there. You see, most of the people who were taken away in those tribes, including Zebulun and Naphtali, never went home. They were sent off instead to other lands, to modern-day Turkey and Syria and all these different places, and they never did really come back to Israel. And so by the time we get to this passage that Matthew is talking about here, he realized that these people have a very bitter taste in their mouth. Because what's happening now? Well, the Romans are in town. See, there's this road that goes through the Galilean highlands, and it's this perfect way to come down, especially if you're a marching army coming from the north, from the Mediterranean over the Sea of Galilee and down into Israel. It's the perfect route to come into town and start wreaking havoc. And they knew that. And so now here the Romans are in town, and they're used to this. The Assyrians and the Babylonians and all of these people who have marched through their land to get to take their plunder and take the people out of Israel, to revoke God's promises in some way that they would always have a land. And so they were in this time of darkness. They were in a time when they really couldn't gain much hope because they kept hearing the promises of God, but they kept getting broken. And now here they are, suffering, sad, mourning, bitter people. And Jesus hears the news that John the Baptist has been arrested, and he knows he's been arrested, that's it. They're not going to let this guy go. And he was right that he hit him. And so he goes up into this land, and it's just completely appropriate that he would go out there and start preaching this news, this good news, that the darkness is coming to an end, that a great light is shining. And I can just imagine that these people looked at him like he had 3 heads or something. Like, dude, do you not know our history? People have come beating this drum before, and we see how it turns out. Why don't you just get back on your donkey and head back south? But he kept beating that drum. A new day has come. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Matthew holds on to tradition, but Jesus comes in and says, out with the old and in with the new, right? No, not at all. See, Jesus didn't come to start a religion. Jesus came to reform the religion that he grew up with. He came to reform Judaism, and he invokes the name of his teacher, John the Baptist. You've heard that before, right? Repent ye, right? Prepare ye the way of the Lord, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Those weren't Jesus' words. Those are the words of John the Baptist. His teacher, his mentor, had been arrested, and Jesus realized that now he had to carry that mantle. It was now up to him to carry on that tradition, even though he knew what he was getting himself into, just like he knew his baptism, what he was signing up for. And it was time. He said, time to put my money where my mouth is. That thing that he signed up for, that little dedication that he did at his baptism, that was when things said go. And he marched up there, and he started saying, the kingdom of heaven is ready for the taking if you just accept it. And if you just do it. You know you guys have suffered at the hands of foreign powers for so long. Why are you causing yourselves to suffer? Why are you systematically oppressing one another? Why would you do that very thing that you've hated in your 1,000 years of history? Why would you do that? He said, if you change your mind, if you change your actions, if you change your thoughts in the name of tradition, not contrary to it, then a great line light will shine here in the darkness. But it's up to you to grab a hold of it. This was Jesus' message to those people. And people apparently started to listen because last time I checked, we are at a church named after Christ, so something must have gone well there. The message must have started to spread. And here we are today. People who have darkness all around us, people who have oppression all around us, people who have a tradition that sometimes we feel like we need to kick aside so that we can make way for the new. We can take our cue from Jesus, from Matthew, from John the Baptist, and realize that tradition is there for a reason. That tradition is alive and well, and the tradition is something that is marked with wisdom from those who have preceded us, just like Henry, just like John the Baptist, just like the prophets, such as Isaiah, who spoke their message of hope, of light, of new beginnings. And so we stand here today as a people who should be proud of our traditions. Sometimes they need to be changed. Sometimes they need to be amended or adjusted to make way for the new. Indeed, this is true. But we cannot. We must not throw them away. Because sometimes there are some gems in there that we'd be wasting if we let go of. Just like Jesus, reassuring people that hope was at hand and that light was ahead of them. Let us now go with our heads held up high, knowing that regardless of the way the situation looks in our own lives, regardless of the way the situation looks around us and the people right outside of our doors, there is a light that shines in the darkness. There is hope. And that if we are wise enough to take tradition, to use it in the right way, that hope will come true for us too.